Welcome to today's Local to Global workshop featuring David Morse. Local to Global, an initiative of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, engages early career professionals aged 21 through 40 in peer-driven learning and dialogue on leading international affairs issues today. An excellent source of networking opportunities, Local to Global events are informal yet informative, emphasizing discussion, dialogue, as well as lively interaction between early career professionals. A couple of announcements before we move forward. On Thursday, August 20th, Local to Global will be hosting our next speaker, University of Houston's Julian Cardenas. Make sure you sign up today on our website at wachhouston.org. Also, stay tuned for more information as the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston plans to host former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich in the fall. And now, on to our speaker and president of DBM Consulting and Associates. David is also a member of the German American Chamber of Commerce, the Australian American Chamber of Commerce, the United States Association of Energy Economics, Houston chapter, as well as the U.S. Department of State's District Export Council. And lastly, in addition to being a dedicated member of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, David has been chosen this year as one of the Council's 2020 Global Leaders of Influence. We look forward to learning much from David and hearing any strategies he has on negotiation. David, welcome, and thank you so much for your time.
Tagline that you guys have got of local to global. For many people, at least for myself, that's been my journey as well, going from local to global. What I'm going to do today is draw it a little bit the opposite direction, though. My best learnings, I would say, in negotiation were actually coming back from the global perspective and understanding that the local aspects, that is, things closer to home, were very much the same. We're operated on the same basis. And that means anything from negotiations around the dinner table to a traffic stop in Morocco, which I'll mention a little bit more about later, or between international companies or companies that are in the international stage, your workplace, things in the news that over time learned, understood that these things are all connected. We've got a nice small group here, so basically everyone should think of a question, I suppose, and you'll get airtime. I'm going to give one cautionary point to this talk that I'd like people to keep in mind perhaps for their questions, is that if you approach this topic with the idea that negotiation skills, let's say, means winning, then my argument to you is you're missing 95% of everything that's going on around you. You're missing 95% of all the opportunity that you could gain through good negotiation. And that's because the good negotiation skills are in all of us. That's my argument to you for today. They're present in everything you do. And if you recognize what is going on in negotiations, in interactions between people, and you practice those learnings, then success will come. You don't have to be some megastar doing mergers and acquisitions. The skills are in all of us. So who am I and what background do I have? So you may have seen on the bio or listing that I've got a PhD in chemistry. That may sound cool or scary to you, but I would argue to you that it's really, I got trained as a chef. There's a lot of parallels between chemistry and cooking. So I got an advanced degree in culinary arts, I suppose. I was in R&D for a while. I went to R&D management. Within about a decade after starting work after the PhD, I was in a business role. And within a couple of years after that, it became a global role. So I went from that very local of just working with people every day, like everyone does, to working predominantly with companies and people around the world. And that was always about performance products. And why do I highlight the idea of a performance product to you is because the negotiations were not about price. If you have a price negotiation, it's a much different, most people can go to the store and buy a TV, without any advanced skills. And it's a really straightforward connection between what you're looking for and what it takes. So performance products were very much about value. So they had to communicate that across whatever boundaries I was trying to operate with. My experience has got a lot of successes, I would argue, also a lot of failures. All of them important learnings, both professional and personal, inside the company and outside. So, in a normal workplace and with customers. And it was always, or could always be about both people and things. And we'll get back to that as well, is that the idea that people are as important as the things you're trying to negotiate for is a critical learning. So my experience, I suppose, my journey, talking about career and career workshop, is that it took me many years to realize that mine was a personal journey of discovery. May have gotten that idea by having a chemistry degree, but I really compelled, not just interested, but compelled to learn and problem solve. And everyone, all human beings are problem solvers and learning. I was really driven. I realized that my path and my journey was that I just kept looking for more and more complicated problems to solve as things went on, and those ended up being involving people, having to do with things of value, and across some difference, some boundary, which on the global stage was a border or language, but on the local stage turned out to be the exact same things. Okay, enough about me. And again, to get the idea about the tools are on all of us, or in all of us. In fact, that they're so common that we all have the propensity to overlook them. I'm going to share a little video thing here, or animation. And the important things of this toolkit, I would argue for you, are language, and they're composed of some different little parts. And language is not languages like German or English or Hindi. It's the tools we use to transmit information. And then if we jump ahead a little bit, those tools then get built into or added to with ones that are culture. And that culture is, again, not Italian or American. Whoops, go back, sorry. But rather the tools we use to understand information and interpret, or even more important than that. And then the last part is the tools that we use to negotiate something of value. And usually when it's between people, it's doing something they couldn't do otherwise. So I just do those for the visual idea. And this is a tool I use. It's the keys of negotiation that end up forming I'll just jump ahead, the parts that are in negotiation that we're more familiar with, which are preparation, engagement, and partnership. That's the tool set. And I'm just arguing that you should find your own lens or key set that you use to interpret everything that's going around you. I can describe mine. Maybe it wouldn't help others. Okay, and these lessons are important, or these tools get applied whether it's negotiations about Brexit, or it's about the renegotiated NAFTA called USMCA, even as much as it's about fictional stories. So if any of you are interested in like the program series and books, The Expanse, there's negotiation in there. Or there's a recent movie a few years ago, Tom Hanks, called The Bridge of Spies, which was about a Germany, Cold War negotiation. You can use these to interpret and look and find information all around you for improving negotiation, your skills in negotiation. So the central tenet or another tenet, I suppose, of all this is that the lessons that when you're dealing with people and trying to achieve something, the people side needs a strategy just as much as the objective side. So if we're talking, for example, you're trying to achieve something, but you've got to do it through people, you need the strategy, you need to find the balance between the things you need to do to get the people engaged as much as getting to an objective. And we live in a world, certainly in the business world, where it's very important to achieve your objectives. Well, it's also important to understand how to do that through people. My example I'm going to give you is one of my favorite ones about how that played out for me over time. I started out with having to be very conscious about building in these tools and the perceptions of how I was working through a negotiation, and over time it became subconscious. Well, our family does a lot of things overseas, traveled a lot. We did a Moroccan trip few years ago now, where we drove almost the whole country, spent about 2 weeks doing about 2,000 kilometers. The day before we were going to leave, we said, okay, we got one more day, we'll take a day trip to the coast. And it was a resort area where a lot of people did vacations, foreigners and foreigners from the Middle East did vacations. So we're in the middle of nowhere, and boom, I'll say a speed trap. I might argue that I didn't see any speed limit signs. The cops were there, so you can decide whether I was speeding or whether it was a speed trap, doesn't really matter. But here was a situation where Moroccans speak Arabic, but it's a version of Arabic that's got a lot of French in it. We're in the middle of nowhere, and one of the things that immediately came to my mind, did not come to mind for my wife and my 2 kids that were in the car, was the Douglas Adams book, Hitchhiker's Guide in the Galaxy, which says, "Don't panic." And I can remember myself just sort of like taking a big breath and waiting as the cop comes up to the car. Well, the conversation is broken English and French. I'd spent a few months in Paris in the past and had, maybe a couple words of French, and so we're trying to communicate what was going on. He basically asked for my passport, which he had to, it's ID, overseas ID, and anyway, it is you. And after a couple of minutes, it was clear he wanted 50 euros in exchange. But he wasn't writing me a ticket. And so I'm thinking, somewhere between bribe and if I give him money, we get thrown in jail, I got to pay more money, no clear. So I asked for a receipt, and that's also the French word. So got that was a successful thing. But he wasn't going to write that. He wanted the 50 euros. He was holding my passport out. And so it escalated. And he said, well, because the trade was not, the exchange of the negotiation wasn't going on. So moved to the next step, and he says, well, let me see your documents. Well, turns out in Morocco, when you have a rental car, you have to have the rental documents in the car. We had just taken a day trip. My documents were back in Marrakesh, in our hotel room. So this time we're out of the car, I'm trying to look through the trunk, and I'm pretty sure I do not have them because I'm pretty sure they're in my briefcase back at the hotel. I'm not finding them. I look into the back window of the car. My wife and my 2 kids, they are absolute statues. They are not moving at all against the back of their heads. I don't find the documents. Basically, the cop says, well, we might have to impound your car. And we're in the middle of nowhere. We're a couple hours away from Marrakesh. And so the idea of, we're in trouble. But the point of the negotiation that was going on was trying to learn what each of us was, sensitive to, what each of us wanted. Well, I wasn't giving him the 50 euro for the no ticket in my passport. And he ended up calling over another cop, an older one or something. He starts flipping through my passport, and he hits on a Saudi Arabian visa. Everything changes at that point because this vacation area nearby, very much frequented by Saudi Arabians. And it was sort of playing it out to find out where each of the opportunities and leverages could be. And for this particular group, or let's say elderly policeman, he's like, the last thing he wanted to do was get his name attached to hassling some foreigner and it leaking back to the Saudis. So he's like, you go to Saudi? I said, yes. And he's flipping through and then he looks at me again, you go? And so at this point I realized I found something that he is valuing. And I say, well, yes, many times. And so, boom, that's it. Gives me back the passport, says, bonjour, you go back to Marrakesh. And so one of the points of the story is just simply take time and patience to let the situation develop and learn what the other person is valuing. There's nothing lost by doing that. So that's just my story, and a relationship needs time and it needs shared interest to find those, it needs time to find those shared interests. What is obvious to you is not obvious to other people. What's obvious to other people is not obvious to you. Okay, so the key points to finish the 15 minutes was the career parts. My advice or guidance to you is to very much work to learn another person's perspective. We are not designed to do that. We as humans are designed to preserve everything from our own vantage point. It takes a lot of work to try and reverse that. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes practice. I advocate to you, engage without objective. That means, networking. I like networking in the sense that I have no expectations and I meet someone, they're willing to engage with me. Well, learn about that person, observe, question. I'm very much in favor of asking questions that draw people out, not yes, no questions, but broad ones. And use all of that to challenge whatever it is that you believe. Am I right in this? What are they thinking? Always ask yourself the questions. And then the third part to build that out is make your world as big as you can. Soak in information from wherever you are, from all the sources you have. And what that effectively means is do everything you can to avoid being inside a bubble. For me, it was very valuable to go both the local to the global and then reverse it back down. And with that sort of story, maybe it's, if you end up looking at it in my background, is that my tagline is listen for success. That listening is critical. And so I think that's probably 15-ish minutes or so. And so I think Youre and Johan will sort of manage questions as they come up, but I look forward to answering anything I can.
Yeah. So thank you, David. I love that story. And yeah, like it would be great if you could open your video. We want to meet you. We want to make this interactive. And we want to give you the chance to make your question firsthand to David. So you can also raise your hand here on the feature, or you can send your question over the chat as well. So who wants to be first?
I can start off with one.
Yeah, please.
You don't mind? David, I know you did mention that how your trajectory changed from one direction to another with doing chemistry and then leading to another way. You did mention that the way is you found what your drive was problem solving, and that kind of helped you branch out and find out other ways into finding your passion or what drives you.
Right.
How do you see that in regards to for any of us who need to take that divergent path, but let's say it's not as clear to us as it was for problem solving for yourself?
Well, I guess maybe a part that I did not either emphasize strongly enough is I only recently, let's say in the past decade or so, figured that out. It was You know, if I look, an understanding in hindsight. And so that if someone is early in their career, then the kinds of things that I advise is don't be afraid to do a lot of introspection, that whatever it is that is driving you and is your passion in life, follow that definitely. But that's probably not the key thing that's really driving you. It's somewhere deeper down in your makeup, that's much more general than something specific of, let's just pick for example, money. You want to earn a lot of money. Well, that you follow that, but it's entirely possible that you want to earn a lot of money for some other purpose. So the only way you're going to figure that out faster than I did is in spending time on introspection. What is it that I really want? And thinking through that, the things that please me, the things that I'm good at, and the third part is always, and that someone is willing to pay you for.
Thank you.
We have Jennifer here, please.
Yeah, I had a question for you, David.
Sure. Yep.
If you could share your thoughts on what kind of phrasing or diction might be more appropriate when asking someone about themselves to expand your own worldview or curiosity, and also what might be words that would be a turnoff to them, expounding upon whatever they're talking about.
Okay, so those are good. Those are, that question is, both of them, are very much just how to connect with people and do it successfully, effectively. And I'd say the two parts that spring to mind quickly is it's not so much, let's say, the words or the specifics of what you say, it's how you approach it. And one of them is you talking about you in using phrases that are them directed usually sets someone up for being a little defensive. And so you can always say things like, oh, I've heard, which are either is your perception or about a third party. Those are always good kind of things. I would say in general, those are, approach the question, whatever the topic is, wherever you are, with, hey, this is something that I saw was interesting, in a sense, offers it up, then what do you think about it? And then the other part is questions that draw people up. People, by and large, people like to answer questions about themselves. They like to talk about themselves. So whatever, is in the situation that you draw out. I was at an Australian American Chamber of Commerce networking event, and someone from China we're chatting, so there's a little bit of a connection made there. And I just remembered reading about all the different dialects of what we would probably call Chinese that are in the country of China. I said, oh, so you're from the south of China, that's very different from the other Mandarin and principal language. That's all I had to say. And we, not just on language, but we talked about China for an hour. So I'd say you be broad, you ask questions that are not directed at a person, but directed at a thing or about you, and then get something to so I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Thanks, David. We have our next question here from Jeffrey. I'll read. Jeffrey asks, what are some of the ways to understand and approach the people element in negotiation?
Yep, and probably the best one I'll start with, what I like generally giving advice in this area, is that if you just keep in mind that the person across from you is another person, just like you, it's another human being, I hope, or I many times hope, that offers up it answers a lot of questions about how to approach someone, that you need not be so concerned about, let's say, who or how they are, because they're just another person. What would you like to do? Like I was mentioning to Jennifer, people like talking about themselves. You draw them out with a very broad question that lets them talk about themselves. I would say that's the principal thing, that the people side. And then if we think about the interpretation, what I would generally call the cultural piece, it's realize that just because you interpret something one way is not a good indication that the other person is. In fact, you should assume you're wrong. Whatever it is you think they're thinking, just assume you're wrong, and then try and pull them out and understand what it is they really are thinking. Those two aspects, I think, are, they're just the very normal components of a conversation with your best friend. You go into it interested in what they're thinking, and if you're unsure, you ask and you probe around a little bit as a friend. So those very natural human characteristics, I would say, are the principal ones that let you handle people, because they're the normal things that people do. Think of a conversation with your friend or your family. Try and map that to someone you don't know, which is hard. We'll definitely. Okay. I hope that was okay.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, David. Okay, I'll get the next one. We do have a next question here from Kelsey.
Okay.
In negotiation, how do you figure out how much to initially ask or maximize your benefit without overstepping and offending the receiver? For instance, salary negotiation,
Right.
which many of us young professionals might be interested in as well.
Yeah, that's right. So it's going to have a two-part answer to it, because there's a very general answer, but the general answer is very much on value negotiations, which of course in a salary, even though it's about money, it's about how they're interpreting what you can do for them. And the first advice is don't go fast. It's not you're not focused on asking that question about the money and the salary. You're trying to draw them out for what it is that is valued, and can you meet that? Then the money will come, let's say, as well as it can, because money, money, religion, and politics, or whatever, people get very sensitive on. So you're not, unless you've got a relationship with a person, you're not going to be able to draw that out directly. So that's the general answer, but I'd say that's a very unsatisfying answer in general, because salary negotiations are very critical and important metrics for is my work being valued, and are they valuing me? So I suppose the best guidance is just go slow. Don't try to go fast to salary, and don't make the conversation around the salary, but rather the value underneath it. And you have to decide for yourself, I suppose, at some point, that what it is the value metric, or let's say the salary metric, is that you're, in a sense, your line in the sand, what you're not going to go beyond, and trust that. So without the specific conversation about a specific negotiation on salary, I know it's probably can be an unsatisfying answer, but that's the general one.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that one. Yeah, of course, it's always a little nuance for everyone, but definitely appreciate to look at the value of things and baselines in that.
Right.
Let's see. We have our next question here from Deidre. So she says, "Hi, David. How do you overcome internal politics in your own team before engaging an external party in a negotiation?" For instance, Deidre has this challenge when it comes to negotiations with oil and gas contracts, with maybe a lot of our members do as well.
Yeah, that is a very good question. It's very good because I can speak from my own personal experience that the negotiations that were always the hardest for me to achieve successfully and understand so that I could do better in the future were always inside a company. For me, my mind naturally gravitates, we're all in the same company. The enemy is either the competition or is the customer, but inside the company, we're all on the same playing field. And that's not how people work. That's how I would like people to work, but that's not actually how it works. And so to answer the question is back to my time and patience and practice is you have to go slow. In fact, it's like working with, imagine if you can that your colleague is your family member. And I would say probably I'd even be more specific as a family member that you're living. Not one that, okay, you know, my brother, I can ignore what he says because he lives on the other side of town or another country or whatever. But someone that you have to work with, think of it as a family member. And I would argue that one of the only ways you're going to get to the point where you can at least have a position of commonality or common interest to work from is you're going to have to devote time to the relationship. So you can't do that with everybody, but there are, I think we all can sense in the sort of tribal people that we are, that in a work environment, there's some people more critical than others. Some are easier to work with than others. And if someone is in that pivotal place where you've got to get them on board or at least figure out how they can support, you can support them or them you in going to that outside company, it takes time. That's the hard part because at least in my mind, I assume, oh, it's straightforward. We're all on the same team. And people just do not work that way. I hope that answered the question because that's a very good one about how to work inside a company where, and again, this is just my perspective, everyone should actually be on the same side. And it turns out that's not how things work.
Thank you, David. I want to jump to this one question, which I think is pretty valuable to for a lot of us at this point in time. Question from Lynn Travis. Lynn says she really enjoys the concept of what is the other person valuing as opposed to what is the other person saying. She says this is actually becoming more of a challenge now since most of us don't see each other face to face. You lose a lot of those kind of little cues you have there in between the value of seeing each other face to face. Are there any ideas on how to improve your skills during this time with the Zoom, text, or phone era with less of an in-person aspect to it? How can we navigate this?
Yeah, and that's also a good one. It's very timely, of course, for everything that we're all doing. I actually gave a little talk to the German American Chamber of Commerce back in April that was sort of along this line. Is what are the virtual issues that you have to deal with? And they are substantial because you lose a lot of body language. You know, you can see from here up on me. What's the advantage of something like this Zoom call is you can see my facial expressions and stuff. There is a big disadvantage though, and that is that there's a time lag. And in a conversation with someone, and it depends on language, which is really cool, but depends on the language, that there's a gap between when you finish a sentence and the other person is ready to start theirs, and it's honestly, it's half a second. And there's another gap between that half second and 1 second where you're already thinking, oh, wait a minute, they didn't understand. And honest to goodness, that half second gap is exactly the time delay that is on a virtual system like this. So let's start and let's assume we have most people, unfortunately not all, but many people have access to this kind of communication. You have to stop yourself and you have to add this extra sort of half second or second gap to let someone answer. When two people talk over each other on something like this, the microphones often fight. So you talk, you can't hear the other person can't hear you. It's a disaster. So you gotta just stick this little step in. Now, if you go to a telephone call, we're used to that. We've trained ourselves how to handle that. The issue is often there, but in a telephone call, often there's not that gap. It's much more prevalent on something that's going through the internet. And then the question sort of went down into email, text. That lets me bring up another topic, which is the context of whatever is being talked about is absolutely horrible if you go to, let's go all the way down to a text or something. You have to know very well what the other person is thinking or the context of what they're trying to drive at. And that's the only way two-word texts work. You know, if someone just, if you're in an email or, no, I'll say a text conversation back and forth, the only reason it works is because you and that other person have set up some understanding of where each of you is coming from. And without that, if you just do a little two-word text to someone you haven't, talked to in a month, something's going to go wrong. And that is probably for the email and the text and things that are really out, have the context removed from them. It's assume something's going to be misunderstood. Don't assume it's going to be understood. Assume it is not going to be understood. And so, which means you either take more time with what you're doing, you explain more, you're just more patient. And usually if it's something like, let's say, a text conversation, it just means be patient. There's going to be more back and forth. It's just natural in that mechanism. So it's, unfortunately, it's back to the time and patience and practice that I was mentioning earlier. As you remove context, as you remove the clues that we get as we are, what we're designed for is this face-to-face conversations. As you remove all the pieces of that, things start going wrong. And so you just be patient.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Looks like we're learning a lot here, especially with the themes of kind of patience and not saying assuming the worst, but I guess that's setting the bar down to where I'm using bad euphemisms here, bad words here, but pretty much to understand, to take your time and kind of almost like Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. But no, I appreciate that. I'm wondering if we do have time for a couple more questions to squeeze in here. I do have one from Heather that asks, have you ever negotiated with parties who became angry or uncooperative? If so, how do you handle them, or how could we handle them? And
so, yeah, and I could give examples on an international stage, but I actually don't want to do that because I want to get across the point that this is normal in negotiation. So I'm going to give example of a couple times in my career, I've been a manager of people, so an administrative manager. And part of that has to do with, talking about performance issues and the like. And, when you've gotten into a situation where you have to communicate a message to someone that they're not going to take well, the reaction that you will, I won't say often get, but you can get is anger. It's, it's coming out, and you should understand where it's coming from. But in those situations then, and those are generally face-to-face. So I should actually premise that. I'm thinking that generally when someone gets angry, and the problem is person to person. If it was a Zoom call or something, or a telephone call or something, then it's like, oh, you just hang up the phone or something. It's done. At least so is that. So I'm going to talk more about the person to person, and that is that when someone's angry, taking it personally is going to make it worse. So they're in a fight mode. If you get in a fight mode, everything's going to go downhill. So back to the taking the animal part of your brain and using the top part to try and control things, or just manage. Control is probably the wrong word. Is, it's body language. You don't raise your hands, you step back, you lower your voice. And what that does is it lets time progress. It makes you patient, time progress, so the person can vent whatever it is that they're venting, because they're angry, because they're feeling hurt in some way. So negotiations that have that part in it, there's like a pullback time. There's like not threatening them, and then if you have the presence of mind to acknowledge, not that they're right, because you're probably not going to agree there, but to acknowledge their feelings are real. You know, if they're angry about something, whether it's words like, you know, I understand, which that may not work, something like that, but just saying back to them what they're feeling, you seem very angry about this topic. Those kind of words and those kind of interactions just help to validate that someone is, you know, their feelings are real. And then a lot of times that venting is what's important. Then they can come notch it down and you can start progressing along that path. So anger and emotions, and there's a whole body of work about how you deal with difficult people in negotiations, which is really how you deal with difficult people in normal life, because normal life is negotiation. But those little pieces of pull yourself back from escalation, and you should develop the presence of mind so you don't exacerbate the situation. You don't inflame it. If you're going to inflame it and you're going to go into fight mode, it is not going to help either party achieve any objective.
Thank you so much, David. We have lots of questions here, wonderful questions, and looks like we're going to have to end off on one more question.
Sure.
I'd like to thank Jennifer Krager for having her video on. With that, I would love to present her question. If she'd like to present that question on her own, like you did in the first one, we'd be happy to have that.
So I think you hit on earlier, it's a tough thing for people to change their method in communication. And one of the things that you hit on, which was really enlightening to me, was the fact that you said you have to assume that you're wrong, which seems counter to what any normal human being would want, which is to be right.
Correct.
So is there any way that you can share some tips or tricks on how to kind of retrain your mindset to be able to assume that you're wrong when going into communications with other people?
So like any good thing, you know, a couple ideas pop to mind. But I would say the first one is you have to be able to recognize your own emotions. You know, you have to have some level of self-identity that is, okay, you throw a wrench in between the emotion and the thought part to get the emotion, which is natural. It happens to everyone. That's going to happen. But to just put a little pause in between that emotion and, I'll say, verbalizing it or putting it out there. You can, you know, there's a considerable difference between body language that shows you're unhappy and venting that unhappiness. So the first step is, and it only takes nominally this 1 second delay to just pause that, and then many opportunities open. So the first step is, the training is just be able, try very hard to stop the emotion to drive your actions. Separate those two. The second piece of it is always think of, ask a question to understand. Assume that you're wrong, like you were rephrasing what I said, is that, well, if you always assume that you do not understand, then you need to ask a question, the best thing is to use the question, or in the question, use the words that person said. So I think that you're a crazy person. Oh, you think I'm a crazy person? Those open-ended, you know, comments, people naturally react to those and say more. Because if you use the same words, then you're validating what they're saying, that you heard what they're saying. But then because you use the same words, they add on to it. So questions that are probing to elicit more feedback. Get your emotions, just pause just a little bit, break them just a little bit, and then what do you mean by that? Mm-hmm. Those are the two things.
Is that kind of like a mirroring technique? Is that what it's called? Okay.
Yeah, I think the words that I use, and I ended up doing some personal training, not work training, but training on a personal side. And the words that I learned were reflective listening, but I think mirroring is the same kind of idea. You reflect what that other person is saying, and you do those two things. You validate that you heard them, and they'll say more. because all of us like talking.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Well, David, thank you so much for coming out today. This has been engaging, informative, and just a real pleasure for all of us here. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out here today. We appreciate your time coming out here at noon today. Stay tuned. We do have our next month's program with Professor Julian Cardenas from the University of Houston. And just to let you know that this event will be recorded and will be available on YouTube. So feel free to like, subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive information as soon as they come out, our videos as soon as they come out. And once again, thank you all for coming out. I hope you had a wonderful time here. Continue to stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you. Y'all have a
And thank you all as well.
Thanks, David.
And lastly, we're going to be sending you David's information via email. So thank you again for registering. Feel free to share, and we're very glad to have you and host you. And thank you again, David. This was wonderful.
Good, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Have a great day, everybody.
You too. Bye.